They found this man floating in Central Park with 40 feet of organs out of his body. And what was she doing? Sitting at home eating mac and cheese. Welcome back to another week, another Sinister. It's me, your favorite Hot Topic employee, BOZE. And listen, this week, we're just jumping right into it because there is a lot to unpack here. Daphne Abdallah was born May 18th in New York City. And her background starts off incredibly traumatic and then switches to something that I don't think I've really ever seen in a Sinister before. For Daphne, just days after she was born, her parents both died in a car crash. Now, what's crazy about this was, in the 80s, it wasn't mandatory to have to wear a seatbelt. Well, I mean, eventually it was after a lot of things like this happened in New York. They made it mandatory. But at the time, you didn't really have to wear your seatbelt, and they didn't. You know how culturally, when some kind of law gets put into place, people are like, no, I don't want it. Even though we're like, wait, this isn't that bad. People were so against using seatbelts that some people would even cut the seatbelts out of their car in protest. But, slowly New York was like, okay, this is a really big problem. Like, too many people are dying from not wearing seatbelts. This is mandatory now. And other states slowly picked it up. But, okay, back to the story. So ultimately, Daphne is the byproduct of one of these fatal accidents. And just days after she was born, she was handed over to the state. However, Daphne ended up getting adopted by some incredibly wealthy people. And I don't just mean like, oh, they were doing all right. Like, these people were rich. Her mother, Catherine, was this beautiful French-born model. And then her father he had like some contacts in the like international food industry. So that's how he made all of his money. Well, they both got together and they moved to New York. In their 40s, I guess, who knows, maybe they couldn't have kids, maybe she didn't want to have kids, who knows? But whatever the case is, they decided, let's adopt. And thus, Daphne was brought into the home. Now, you guys know I love looking up the houses of where people grew up whenever I go through these cases. And, to this day, 115 Central Park West is, a pretty decent looking building. But the big thing is it's overlooking Central Park. I mean, I'm looking at it right now. This is just prime real estate in New York. And you guys know the stuff in New York, it's pricey. Well, not only was this just the perfect location and a really, really nice place back in 1980, they also had a penthouse. This was a luxury condo, literally overlooking Central Park. There were people that were like celebrities and bankers and, Wall Street's booming at the time. That is who was living in this building. And Daphne, who is literally just weeks old, is now coming in with her glamorous supermodel mom, her super rich business person dad, and they are ready to give her the best life possible. The neighbors remember Daphne as this really sweet girl that genuinely had it all. She was always wearing these really cute little flowery dresses. She was really smiley. She's always, right next to her beautiful mom. She's got private tennis lessons as a little kid. She goes to the best schools in Manhattan. I mean, this was the framework for a child that was going to grow up and be successful, or at least, I don't know, well-loved, liked, a socialite perhaps. Now, of course, all girls kind of go through something in their preteen years. Around 12, 13, 14, I'm sure a lot of you guys know, we start looking at like, what do I actually like? What interests me besides what my parents, point me to? What makes me feel excited and alive? And for Daphne, that was kind of doing bad stuff. This episode is sponsored by Squarespace. Is it time to build the website that you've been putting off? I know. You've been working hard on your business. You've been working hard on your art, your courses, whatever it may be. And the website, we don't want to do that because it's not part of your passion. I get it. Trust me, I get it. But what if I told you that you could knock that all out in 90 minutes? I mean, everything. Registering the domain, typing the text that you need to fill in all the blanks, uploading the pictures, picking out a design. And what if I told you that it wasn't as stressful as you thought it would be? It's kind of fun. Listen, with Squarespace, all you do is you go to the website, sign up, pick from the hundreds of designs they have that are easily customizable, and just click, 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 and keep changing things until you like what you see. I mean, look, you guys that play any of those games that have all the customizable things in it, like you're customizing your house and whatnot, I already know you're gonna love this, okay? Especially y'all that need to make a website. You just click, 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 click until it looks pretty. Best part is Squarespace also has SEO tools to help your website get discovered. They can, register your domain for you. They can do email marketing. I mean, anything, everything you need. It's all right there. And also the back end has a pretty robust dashboard for analytics. So if you like diving into all of that, seeing where your web traffic is coming from, how you can improve, it's all right there. And the best part is we will give you 10% off of your next website subscription or domain registration. All you got to do is go to squarespace.com/sinister. That's squarespace.com/sinister. Daphne was messing around so much that she had to transfer schools twice. Her parents were very affluent, so they kind of were able to scrub most of what did Daphne do? What was the problem? They were just like, hey, listen, if you go quietly, we won't say anything. Just transfer. And this happened to her twice. Then, when they were approaching the third time, her parents considered sending her to boarding school because they just couldn't control her. Later, people would say that by the time Daphne was about 13 or so, she was not just a child, she was a force to be reckoned with. If you were to confront Daphne and even just say, hi, how are you doing? The energy you would get back was very intense. She approached every conversation, every person as a challenge or a puzzle, but it was always something that she fully intended to conquer. People got a really uneasy feeling from Daphne. Everything started with Daphne with what I would consider okay, that's being a kid. She was skipping school. She was hanging out with kids on the street in New York, not going to class. I'm like, okay, maybe it's a phase. Well, this part is really interesting. So I've seen mixed reports on this, where some cases are like, whoa, no, that didn't happen. And then a couple places are like, actually, yeah, that happened. My theory here is that Daphne's family was so rich that they were able to scrub a couple of things or sweep some things under the rug. But doing a little digging, I found out that at one point, her dad had filed a restraining order against her because she was hitting them. This goes on crazy alarm bells for me because a lot of times when a child is hitting their siblings, they go out into the world and they hit other people. Now, when a child is hitting their parents, they definitely have absolutely no respect for any other human being, and they will go out into the world and hurt people. And this wasn't just a once or kind of twice situation. Apparently, it had escalated to the point that the father tried to file a restraining order. Now, something else that I just want you guys to be aware of is throughout this story, you will find that they really wanted to get help for Daphne, and they always saw her as her daughter, even through what she did. They funded everything legally. They really took care of her. But, they really had to put their foot down in some areas and say, this is not okay. So that's an interesting tidbit that, some places are like, it did happen, didn't happen, or whatever. And I'm like, well, who wrote this down if it didn't happen? So I got to tell you guys that. But the main reason, supposedly, that this was happening was by the time Daphne was 14 years old, she was drinking a lot. She somehow was able to get access to just incredible amounts of not just beer or something like that. This kid was heavily drinking liquor. So eventually she gets enrolled at this elite Catholic school in Manhattan called Loyola. And of course, Daphne doesn't give a Daphne's going to do what Daphne does. And she would show up to school without her uniform. Obviously, she knows that's bad. She would also show up, absolutely wasted at 10 a.m. And the other thing that's really crazy is, your brain is still forming when you are a kid. It's still forming when you're 14. And Daphne was just slamming hard liquor, coming to school in the morning, just absolutely drunk when she was a child. And so maybe some of you guys will know a bit better than me, but I'm curious, like, there's no way that doesn't, developmentally affect you in some way. And there was nothing they could do. Daphne was going to do whatever she wanted. And to be quite frank, people were afraid of her. So even though she really, in my eyes, kind of had this like sweet appearance, that might just be from the court photos. As many of you know, but for the few that like aren't aware, when somebody goes to court, especially for something heinous, their defense team will try to dress them up as just the sweetest, nicest person that they possibly can. Most of the court photos present her as kind of like this sweet looking girl with, short hair, like, oh, she wouldn't hurt a fly. But honestly, if you look closely at Daphne and her facial expressions, she kind of is exactly what the neighbors described her as. They said that, she was kind of like presented like she was a badass, like she was just very tough. Those are their words, not mine. They said she was tough looking. She never smiled. She never laughed. She just was very intimidating and didn't necessarily seem to enjoy intimidating people like, our last story, Joanna Dennehy. But it just seemed like that's just the way she was. She hated the world. She was pissed. And it was written all over her face. And people actually described her exactly as such. And they said, it was just a better day if we didn't approach Daphne at all. A lady named Stella Sands, who covered Daphne's case in its entirety, she later said, quote, "She was not your sweet, lovely little blonde girl. She was to be reckoned with." And then, one of the people from the swim team, like, some of the descriptions I'm giving you guys are from like neighbors, people that went to school with her. But then this one actually came from one of the mothers on the swim team. And they said that Daphne, by the time she was a teenager, she didn't like her mom. She just like didn't respect her, didn't care about her, didn't listen to her. And she said Daphne would always walk 3 feet ahead of her mother. She said Daphne was always rude. Sometimes her mom would speak to her like kindly or gently, and Daphne just wouldn't acknowledge her. She wouldn't look at her. She wouldn't respond. If her mother really needed something, she would say, Daphne, let's go. And Daphne would just go the other way. It was like she was intentionally showing her like you do not fucking control me. Get away from me. And people noticed this behavior. And remember I said that, people eventually just came to the conclusion like, okay, if I don't mess with her, she won't mess with me, and she doesn't want to talk to anybody. I'm not going to save her. We're just going to leave Daphne alone. I have a better day if I leave Daphne alone. And it was true. If you didn't really mess with her, she wasn't going to get all up in your face. But this attitude that people had towards her and her own mannerisms kind of turned her into a bit of a social outcast. And that was until she met this boy when she was 15, named Christopher Vasquez. Christopher was from East Harlem. He grew up on 97th Street, and his parents, they were actually childhood sweethearts. And look, I say childhood because they were not just high school sweethearts. They met sometime in middle school and always just kind of had a crush on each other, dated eventually, and then just stayed together forever. And I find this so interesting because, okay, obviously Christopher is about to get tied up in this whole murder, and we'll talk more about him, but like he was shy, he was an altar boy, he was a Boy Scout, and like just going back to his parents, sometimes, I don't know about you guys, but like, if my friend is like ranting about some guy or some girl they're talking to, and I start like noticing some red flaggy behaviors, I will straight up ask them, I'll be like, wait, what's their relationship with their parents? Like, what was their parents' relationship like? Like, do you know anything? Look, we don't all walk in our parents' shoes, but like sometimes it is interesting to understand like the parent relationships, because either the kids sometimes go hard the opposite of what they were like, or they kind of model that behavior and then the kids follow it, right? I don't know. It's just interesting to me that for Christopher, it was modeled to him. You find your person, you stay with your person forever, you raise a family, you work hard. Like that was the parental model that he got. But of course, he veers off course Anywho, so like I said, Christopher was very shy, very introverted. He genuinely, everyone said that he was a very, very sweet kid. Boy Scout, altar boy, close with his parents. He had a sister, his parents were just, doing their thing. They go to work, they come home, kiss the kids on the forehead, da 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 da. It's a good life, right? Chris's dad was a store manager, so he was doing his kind of 9 to 5 hours. And then his mom was a school secretary. So she was actually very close with her daughter and her son, Chris. Chris loved his mom. People even said that, they would see them walking around Central Park together. He was always very close and calm around his mom. And it was just, a really happy family until after 20 years of marriage, Chris's parents decided that it wasn't working anymore and they wanted to get a divorce. Chris took it pretty hard. I was talking before about how perfect life, married early, true love, da da da. I actually can't imagine what kind of rupture this creates for a child when they are sold that story only to be blindsided by a just full-on separation between their parents. And not to mention, these are people that work, pretty normal jobs living in the incredibly expensive New York City. Their life is about to change drastically. He was only 9 years old when it happened. And something interesting happened to Chris. At one point when he was in third grade, he just stood up in the middle of the classroom and walked out. And when he later talked to some child psychiatrists and explained his thoughts, they realized that he just kind of had this sudden agoraphobia. He was only a little kid, but at 9, they prescribed him Zoloft. He didn't want to be out in public anymore. He had extreme anxiety around people, and he really just kind of shut down. So he starts taking Zoloft and lorazepam, and this is in his system for years and years and years. And when he gets a bit older, he eventually meets Daphne. Both of them gravitated towards each other, probably because they had what felt like a bit of stability and connection. They felt familiar to each other. But another thing is, they both really loved rollerblading. And they loved rollerblading together, for hours and hours. And of course, Chris's parents would let them do this, and Daphne's parents, couldn't control her. So they would just be gone for long stretches of time, just rollerblading together in Central Park. And what I find fascinating about this is, I don't know if you guys have heard before about something called bilateral stimulation. To simplify it for you, bilateral stimulation is, it's rhythmic. It makes the brain alternate both sides of the body and the mind, and it can be very calming and very relaxing in a sense. It's often used in trauma treatments. It can be used for kind of anxiety and meditation. I mean, even just tapping left and right on your legs can actually be quite soothing. And so I just find it really fascinating that the two of them that were stressed children, felt misplaced in the world, just went around Central Park rollerblading together, left, right, left, right, left, right. I'm just a fan of fresh dog food. I am. Y'all ever switch your dog over to fresh food even for a minute? Because y'all know sometimes you're like, ooh, this looks good, I'm gonna give it to him, right? And not only the joy and the energy that they have, not just joy after mealtime, joy all day is whoa, okay, this is definitely the food. That's why I love Ollie, because not only is it fresh and better than kibble, but they've got a great welcome kit that you can try. We've got a little discount for you. And also, you can actually take their quiz to curate it to exactly what your dog needs. It can make poops easier to pick up. It can help with weight control, shinier coat, all that. And look, that's just the logistics. That's the long-term stuff, right? You know for certain that mealtime gets so much more exciting when you are giving them fresh food. And if you haven't tried it before, seriously, just give your pet fresh food for like 3 days. And by the third day, like they're just so overjoyed that like you feel good too. That's a result that you see immediately. Listen, your dog deserves the best. And if you want to give them the best while also getting 60% off of the welcome kit, just give it a shot. Give it a try, okay? Give it a try. All you got to do is go to ollie.com/sinister. You go in there, take the little quiz, tell them about your dog, and boom, welcome kit right at your door, all right? All you got to do is go to ollie.com/sinister. Now, before we get to this part, I just want to make sure that I clarify Christopher Vasquez was diagnosed with agoraphobia at 9, shortly after the divorce. But years later is when he actually met Daphne, and they were both about 15 at this time, okay? So there's actually an exact date for this. It was Thursday, May 22nd, that Daphne and Chris officially started dating. After Chris asked Daphne to be his girlfriend, they sealed the deal by going rollerblading. And listen, the rollerblading and the sweetness didn't last long, because as soon as they hit a little pit stop, they both started drinking and smoking. Daphne loved getting high. She loved getting drunk. And I mean, it's crazy to me that she was drinking so much that she was literally addicted to it by the time she was 14. In fact, Daphne had been enrolled in Alcoholics Anonymous at the age of 14. Obviously, she did not abide by the rules. She didn't take any of it seriously, but the girl was genuinely addicted to alcohol by that age. So while she and her boyfriend are in the park drinking, they run into this group of guys who they're older dudes that are just Central Park dudes sitting over here drinking. They're like, what are these kids doing drinking? And Daphne gets right up in their face. She's like, I'm not a little fucking kid. That's just how Daphne does. And whose face does she get in? Well, it's this guy named Michael Morrow. And that's how they first met. Michael is pretty well known in the Upper West Side of Manhattan. He likes to hang out in the park and have a couple drinks with his buddies. Like, honestly, in the 80s in New York, that sounds kind of tight. They might hit a bar or grab a beer and then just walk around with the boys. Michael's got a good job. He's a real estate broker. He's 44 years old, and he even lived very close to his mom and his sister, still taking care of them, always available, family man with a good job, likes to throw back a couple beers in the park. Well, when he sees these two kids here, there's a part of him that is kind of like, whoa, like, what are you guys doing here? And then also like, this is fucking fascinating. And then also an aspect of him that's like, I can't take this seriously. Like, what is this little girl doing drunk in the park? Like, he's confused, he's fascinated, all at once. Well, here's what's interesting. This actually was not the very first time that Michael had met Daphne. The first time was him meeting her at Alcoholics Anonymous. And then shortly after that, she had approached him and basically asked him if he had any drugs. And Michael knew somebody that basically they traded her for some rolling papers, some alcohol, and some LSD. And Daphne would later talk about this and say that, she took the LSD right away and she felt pretty crazy, so she left the park right away. She had some brief kind of encounters with Michael, but this was the first time that like they had really spoken face to face and saw each other as real people. It almost seems like their previous encounters were like they were just passing spirits. But it's just crazy to me when you think about these faint moments that they met each other, all the way culminating into this one. So on this particular day, Michael, who had loosely run into Daphne before, never met Michael before, he's just doing his thing drinking in Central Park, and he's fascinated by these two. So he's talking to him and hanging out. People said that things seemed pretty normal until, of course, something goes wrong that night. Now, in the early hours of May 23rd, Daphne's dad, who cannot get control of her at all, gets worried. And she's out way past her curfew. She's already got a late curfew, but this is just miles ahead of it. So he ends up calling the police. And the police get to the apartment and they ask the doorman if, they had seen Daphne, if they knew who this girl was. And they said, oh yeah, she came in here before. She might be downstairs. And the police go inside and they find Daphne and Chris Vasquez in this like bathtub that's in a utility room. And they're like cleaning themselves up. And the police come in and they're like, yo, your dad's looking for you. Like, what have you guys been doing? And then they look over and they see blood in the sink. And they're like, holy fuck, is that blood? And then Daphne's like, no, fuck off. Like, yes, it's from a rollerblading accident we had. We were just cleaning up before we went inside so that my parents wouldn't get mad at me. Like, leave. You guys get out of here. And so, the police officer looks at Daphne's cuts, like she did have some type of abrasion or cut on her. And that's a lot of blood. But, okay, we were called for a missing kid. Here's the kid. Let's just get her upstairs. So the officers leave. But just moments later, there's a 911 call that comes in, and it's from the same exact apartment, okay? Like where he just left. And the police are able to trace the call back to Daphne, who they had literally just seen in the utility room. And they go back in, and remember, she's 15. She's a kid. Like, I think she thought she was just going to make this call and it was going to be anonymous or whatever. Like, no, sister, even in the 80s, they can track this kind of stuff. Well, when this person dialed 911, they told them that they were very concerned because their friend had just jumped into the lake. So, anywho, the officers trace this back to Daphne. They go back inside the house where she is eating leftover mac and cheese. She tells the police that she and her boyfriend, Chris, were at Central Park. They were just, walking around doing whatever. And they see Michael and he takes LSD and he just starts going crazy. And then she actually tells the police that her boyfriend, Chris, freaked out and stabbed Michael. I don't even know if anybody can pathologize this series of events. Like, you can't even just call it attention seeking. It's just like absolutely insane. Of course, you need a few more pieces of the story, but I just mean like her calling 911 and then just being in there eating the mac and cheese and like, oh yeah, my boyfriend did it and here's how he did it. Like, what's the goal? So she tells the police that Christopher is the one that did it. And then she even goes as far to tell them that she tried to save Michael herself. So the police go find Chris, they grab Daphne, and they arrest both of them at about 2:30 in the morning. And they go back to the lake to go see if what she's saying is true. But not only is what she's saying true, but it is far more grisly than she described. Daphne and Christopher were arraigned the very next day. They tried to plead not guilty to second-degree murder and robbery, but as the investigation went on, it just... to me, this seemed like some type of crime where Daphne was angry or upset or something, and it's almost like they used it as a bonding ritual. Daphne actually kept his wallet as a souvenir, even though it was covered in blood. It was hidden in her room, like just with her things. They also found she had kept some of the bloody clothing. Not that she was just storing it away for later, but it seemed as though it was actually preserved, like she wanted to keep it. In Chris's room, they also found a knife, and there was DNA evidence on it that seemed to belong to Daphne, Chris, and then obviously as well as it had Michael's DNA on it. Now, here's where things get a little crazy. Remember when I said that when they found Michael, it was a pretty gruesome scene? They found him in the water with just dozens of feet of his intestines just hanging out in the water. His hands were almost severed off. His neck had been practically decapitated. It was like somebody was trying to cut off his hands and his head. As far as his body, it seemed like they had just completely disemboweled him. This was not a self-defense attack. This was not, they didn't know what this was, but it was bloody, it was intense, and it was gruesome. And remember, I told you guys before, Daphne and her family are absolutely loaded. Now, Chris's family, not so much, but he's tied to the case. But of course, Daphne's attorneys, they don't care what happens to him. Their goal is to lighten her sentence, essentially. Because no matter what, she's going to jail for a minute. Like, not only is this serious, but if Daphne did this, which she did, she cannot be outside with us normal people. You cannot be here. So her family hires the biggest, best, scariest criminal defense attorney that they possibly can. This guy's name was Benjamin Braffman, and Benjamin was pretty well known for taking really big, notorious cases. In the early days, he took some Harvey Weinstein cases, early P. Diddy cases. He took Michael Jackson cases. I mean, he was expensive and he was known for getting the job done, essentially. Also, Chris and Daphne were going to be tried as adults because of the severity of the crime. I mean, think about it. Guys, if you've seen a couple episodes of Sinister or dozens of episodes or who knows, every episode of Sinister, how often do we see cases that are just incredibly gruesome like this? I mean, the first one that comes to mind for me is like Carla Faye Tucker or something, but it's just not often that people are attempting to sever somebody's head or disembowel them. I mean, it's just, this is, what? So Braffman was pretty well known for getting a lot of people to walk, which were never supposed to walk. So his tactic with Daphne is to play into her being a young 15-year-old girl and just paint her as more of an innocent bystander in Chris Vasquez's insane, just unprompted attack. Daphne actually spoke to the prosecutors and she said, "I am only a witness. I only just saw what happened." They're like, "Well, what happened that night, Daphne?" And she said, "Well, I was just in the park rollerblading with my new boyfriend who I barely know. And, this older guy came up to hang out with us and, we started to hang out with him. And, then we decided to go skinny dipping in the pond. And, when we went skinny dipping, I got out of the water and he put his arm around me and it made me uncomfortable. And Chris just snapped and he started stabbing him." Well, one thing that the prosecutors pointed out here was that some of the bruises on Michael specifically matched Daphne's rollerblades. So this implied, well, what? Did you jump in the Central Park Lake skinny dipping with your rollerblades still on? Or did you kick him before then? I also think this is just such a strange, graphic, really kind of scary detail because like Daphne is a kid. She's 15 and she's so angry at the world that she is kicking this 44-year-old man with these rollerblades. It's just, there's something about it that's very like juvenile and eerie to me. It's so rageful, but so childlike too at the same time. And these were Daphne's rollerblades, not Chris Vasquez's. So the prosecution pokes a hole in this. I mean, obviously Braffman is like a ruthless criminal defense attorney. He's going to spin up any story that he can that kind of loosely fits into the evidence, right? So she claims that she was just a bystander and she never did anything. And she just doesn't know how it got this far. Now, this homicide detective named Robert Mooney, boy, he was not buying Daphne's story for shit, okay? So he starts really pressing her on these, like, what happened. And the more he talks to Daphne, it's either the more she cracks or maybe even the more she slightly wanted to brag about things because more and more details started coming out. And eventually he gets her to admit to participating in the actual stabbing and the murder. And eventually she does also admit, okay, I kicked him. And then eventually she does admit that it was her idea to disembowel Michael because she told Chris that, well, the body's gonna float unless we take all of his organs out. Braffman had concocted this whole story for her and it just slowly unraveled because she, I don't know, you guys tell me if you think she wanted to brag about it or if they just got her under the pressure. But she started to tell more. In fact, in her interview, she actually said, and these are her words, he would need to be gutted because he's a fatty. That is what Daphne said. They literally carved him up. So then Chris participates, according to Daphne, and takes out his knife and he cuts Michael's throat, but they stab and slice his throat over 30 times. 30 times. And then okay, I'm trying to save some of the details because it's just so horrific, but like, you need to know what these kids did. After they, opened him and took out his body parts, his internal organs, Daphne said, and now we need to fill him up with rocks so he'll sink. Like, this was her idea. Then you would think it's over. You would think it's over. And also, sorry, I'm just going to I'll tell you at the end of the story, there's another part of this, and just know that I wanted to say it right now, but I'm not going to say it. Then Daphne's like, who apparently thinks she's like in the fucking mob or something. Daphne is like, well, also, we should cut his hands off so that they can't identify him. And then she claims that that's also why she took the ID. She said that at first she tried to burn the wallet, but then she decided to keep it. That is what they did to this man they barely knew. So that's Daphne's kind of bit of the trial. And one thing that we found really interesting was Wealth played a huge role in this because for much of Daphne's case, she was just walked to the DA's office and had some conversations, barely spent time in court. Whereas Chris, who had to get a public defender, he was just, strolled into court like everybody else, handcuffs, jumpsuit on, criminal status, right? Money plays a really big role. And actually, you will see that in how this ends. So during Chris's trial, his attorney actually argues that Daphne is the one that stabbed Michael first. He says that, she kind of started the altercation between them and she's the one that ended it. They didn't try to argue that Chris was necessarily a bystander, but he said that he was a follower that night being, quote, led around by a pit bull. That pit bull being Daphne. They're kids, but they are being tried as adults here with, once again, one of the most horrific murders I have heard. Chris's attorneys did a good job, quote, in the sense that they really focused on you can't prove who did the killing. And because Daphne wasn't testifying in his trial, the jury kind of was unsure. They were able to paint a long history of like who Daphne was. And so the jury in Chris's trial was kind of like, well, damn, maybe she did. Maybe she did start it. Like, we really don't know. And so ultimately, these are two completely different trials with two totally different stories. It was just so interesting. Like, when I was working with the researcher and writer on this, you really have to take the history of who they are and then combine what is in the trial and then just try to find common ground between all three, because the court documents don't always say the whole truth. I mean, their job as criminal defense attorneys is to spin up a story. But the story that they spun up actually sort of worked. Daphne ended up pleading guilty to manslaughter in the first degree. This got her 39 months to 10 years in prison. It was very obvious that this should have been at least a second-degree murder charge. And you guys, a lot of you guys know, but first-degree murder charge it can be a variety of things, but a lot of times it's pre-planned, intentional, thought of for a long time. Second degree is usually more like it happened just like on the spot. But it's like with the severity of this crime, it could go a couple of different directions. In the very least, she probably should have gotten second-degree murder, right? Not fucking manslaughter. Now, Chris was also given the same sentence, first-degree manslaughter, and they were both given similar sentences. Then, when they were 20 years old, just a couple years after the trial, they were both up for parole and both denied. Now, rehabilitation is a big part of the sentencing and part of the consideration of whether they'll be let out or not. And Daphne had not changed one bit. She was very disruptive in jail, always causing problems, attacking people. At one point, after multiple infractions, somebody actually wrote on her report, quote, total disregard for human life. So this goes on for years, and then eventually, in 2007, when Daphne and Chris were both 27 years old, they were eventually released. Once they were released with conditions. The two were to never see each other again. Well, I guess they upheld that, but Daphne decided to go back to the crime scene, and she left a bouquet of flowers for Michael, who she had murdered, and also a note. And the note said, are you sitting down? Rest easy. I tried to save you. I'm sorry I failed you. I'm sorry for the pain I caused you and your family. D. Chris went back to East Harlem and moved back in with his dad. And when he got to the house, there were a bunch of reporters outside trying to cover his homecoming. And his dad, who probably felt really remorseful for his divorce and feeling like that caused a lot of Chris's issues and, he wasn't there for him. He fought so hard for his son. He actually punched a reporter outside of the house. And he was telling them, like, get away from my family. Like, my son has paid his dues. He's remorseful. Get away. Like, leave us alone. They wanted to just kind of go into solitude, go off the grid, and just rebuild. Meanwhile, Daphne, who has been released, she can't keep it together. While she is in a halfway house, literally just getting out of jail, going to a halfway house, she viciously attacks another resident, which violates her parole, and Daphne is back in jail. Remember that note? Total disregard for human life. Daphne would then return to prison for another 9 years. I actually don't even think that her initial sentence was 9 years. I think they just kept adding on time because she kept doing stuff. But now they are both 43 years old. And they are both out of jail. Chris stayed clean and stayed out of trouble. He ended up completing like an alcohol program when he was in jail, stayed sober, got a degree, and became a mechanic and just kind of lived a quiet life. I mean, this is a very high profile case and people are always trying to, see what happened to them. Where are they? So in April of 2024, Sun magazine actually caught up with them, Daphne and Chris both, like, what are you doing? What's going on? And Chris gave them a quote. He just said, I just want to live my life and let the past be in the past. Meanwhile, Daphne, she had a car accident in 2009, and apparently this car accident caused her a lot of, mental anguish. Could be connected to the past. Maybe it was just a very horrific crash. But she walks around with a cane now, and she still is not a very happy lady. She describes herself as being in constant anguish and anger. And she didn't give a statement to the Sun. They just took a couple photos of her and moved on. But look, Daphne and Chris, it's interesting because in the court case, they paint two totally different pictures of both of these people. But just to bring it back to like what I told you in the first place, Michael was a dude that was struggling with alcohol, in and out of Alcoholics Anonymous, got himself a good job as a real estate broker, took care of his mom, took care of his sister. In one of the documentaries I watched on this case, you can see his nephew, who still speaks incredibly fondly of him, really, really misses him, and just said, he was just a nice guy. Michael was just here for the ride. He ends up meeting these two kids that were supposed to just be out rollerblading.